Welcome back to Project Methania. In the last episode, we explored how organisms evolved to overcome harsh conditions of cold biomes. We also talked about tholins that formed at the upper parts of the atmosphere and how certain organisms developed different ways of using them. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the opposite side and discover how life adapted to hot and dry deserts of the inner parts of the continent. So, let's start. Previously, we've already talked about regions on Methania where yearly droughts take place, and how plants developed a process called fall drift to avoid losing water during those. In semi-arid regions further inland, where droughts are longer and harsher, plants will be forced to spend the most of the year in dormant state. To avoid competition during the short growing periods, a group of Clutithosa might start developing ways to survive those droughts without needing to lose their leaves. One adaptation that can be seen among many plants in arid environments is CAM photosynthesis. Plants that utilize it only open their stomata during the night to absorb CO2 and carry out photosynthesis during the day, thereby preventing water from escaping their bodies through stomata. A similar pathway could emerge in Aridithosa, allowing them to absorb methane during the night and carry out methanosynthesis during the day. Their roots will get wider and more shallow to maximize the area where they'd be able to collect water, and their leaves will get thicker, thereby minimizing the water evaporation even more. The first creatures to settle in these semi-arid environments would likely be Pentacrabs who already spend the majority of their lifetime underground, and are just generous enough to feed both on roots and carrion. In some highly specialized populations that live in even drier regions, a new adaptation could emerge, a structure for collecting water from fog. This structure would represent a part of their shell that developed a hydrophilic surface consistent with small bumps that would encourage droplets to form and flow down to their mouth, and would somewhat resemble shells of racing striped darkling beetles and other insects found in deserts on Earth. Let's call this group Pentacrab gibbon. Although this harsh environment will be very unwelcoming to most clades, Pentacrabs won't be the only ones to establish a population in these drylands. According to Bergman's rule, animals that live in hotter, drier environments tend to showcase smaller size. So it would be likely that the first animals to start living there will be rather smaller subspecies of steppe-dwelling herbivores. So, for example, a group of bluventabulators, called quadrambulators, instead of migrating during drought periods, could start adapting to these regions. Some of the first adaptations they undergo will be related to preservation of water. Their organs will evolve in a way that will allow them to use as much water as possible, turning their waste products into concentrated guanine-rich paste, allowing them to preserve water and later use it in different biological pathways. To stop their bodies from overheating, additionally to becoming smaller, their back flaps could become much longer, allowing them to radiate heat at greater rate. As it can be seen on Earth, animals that live in semi-arid climates often engage in burrowing behaviors, which allow them to avoid hot and dry conditions. This behavior often comes with a crepuscular or even nocturnal lifestyle, which allows animals to hide in their burrows during the hottest parts of the day, and come out when conditions get better. In case of quadrambulators, their front legs could develop into a pair of digging limbs, with claws resembling a shovel, making them the first group of ambulators that primarily locomote using 4 legs instead of 6. And with them being active during the dusk, their vision could shift more towards enhanced low light sensitivity, favoring the detection of movement and shapes, rather than fine detail or color perception. Another group that would migrate to arid biomes would be capturambulators, and by being closely related to bluventabulators, they'd undergo similar adaptations. Their bodies will get smaller, they would develop a digging behavior, and their digestive system would focus on extracting as much water as possible. What will be different, however, is the way of radiating heat from their bodies. Unlike bluventabulators that develop their hind limbs into a pair of flaps, capturambulators develop them into much smaller tails, to make them less detectable during the hunt. Instead, they could develop an inflatable sac connected to their respiratory system that would expand when body temperature gets too high. This inflatable sac would essentially work as a biological radiator, allowing excess body heat to be radiated rapidly through increased surface area. With that additional cost of thermoregulation, their smaller size and scarcity of food, they will be forced to partially become omnivorous and often engage in retrievery. prioritizing low-risk, low-reward strategies. With the niche of active predators now being opened, another species might take over it. While active flight is arguably one of the most energy-dependent ways of locomotion, it allows species to cover greater distance and provide them with a greater field of view, allowing them to spend less energy searching for prey compared to land-dwelling organisms. In this scenario, Volucrista, by already being adapted to carnivorous diet, would be the best candidate to become a desert carnivore. Their bodies could adapt for fast dives, allowing them to pursue and catch their prey. To be better at doing so, their connected wings could separate into two distinct parts. Their hind legs would specialize more towards catching their prey, while their front legs would take over the air movement, becoming much longer and wider, allowing them to cover greater distances, only relying on gliding. These larger wings would also serve as a means of thermoregulation. Let's call this group Ungula crusta. Now that we covered the semi-arid biomes, let's move deeper in the continent. A thing that becomes apparent pretty soon is that soil becomes darker and darker. You see, while deserts on Earth have light beige color caused by high content of silicates and quartz, as we established in the second episode, silicates are much less common on Methania, so perhaps instead of silicates, some specific carbides could accumulate there. While most carbides are highly unstable and readily react with water, forming short hydrocarbons and hydroxides, thereby increasing the alkalinity of the soil, silicon carbide, by being both highly insoluble and extremely hard, could stay as it is and accumulate in dry parts of Methania, forming black deserts. This would also mean that soil will absorb much more heat from estrus, making these surfaces even hotter than they are on Earth, often even surpassing 100 degrees Celsius mark. Under these conditions, life in deserts becomes practically unlivable, as even extremophile plants would struggle to contain water and formation of oases will be very unlikely, as any rainwater would rapidly evaporate. But perhaps even in these conditions, life could find a way. You see, for the past millions of years, Rimara started splitting apart, forming a narrow inland lake with a slow flow towards the center of the continent, somewhat resembling lakes of North America or certain fjords. The floodplains near that sea could eventually develop a somewhat stable ecosystem, with temperatures, although very high, but livable, allowing some extremophiles to flourish. As mentioned, one major detail that will set this biome apart from the rest of the deserts is the constant supply of ocean water. While the surface of the water would still be hot, just a few meters below, it could reach temperatures of under 40 degrees Celsius. One highly specialized group of plants could eventually develop a method of thermoregulation based around absorbing that cold water, letting it cool down their bodies, and eventually releasing it through their stomata, which would highly resemble transpiration of tropical plants. For this form of thermoregulation to be most efficient, their leaves will need to become bigger, increasing the surface area, and their water transferring system will need to become much stronger, being able to transport great amounts of water at once. And knowing that they will mostly gain their water from that lake, they might as well develop a specialized storage for minerals that were absorbed, keeping their leaves safe from damage. Let's call this group Pseudorothosa. Eventually, this localized growth would attract species of pluventabulators. Also less common, another trend that can be observed in some desert-dwelling animals is the development of body plan capable of traveling great distances in search of resources. It would benefit from long limbs with wide feet that would allow them to travel great distances on sand. Similarly to quadrumbulators, they would rely on their back flaps for heat radiation. Their digestive system would focus on water preservation, but in addition they would need to develop a way of processing salt water, as both their food and water sources would be rich in salt. On Earth, species of seabirds and sea turtles developed salt glands that through osmosis allow them to transfer salt ions and concentrate it in the form of a solution. Eventually, in this group of pluventabulators, a similar organ connected to their hind respiratory openings could develop. Not only that, but because they will start gaining most of their nutrients from Pseudorothosa, their mouth parts will get longer, allowing them to reach for the top leaves. Let's call this group Dunaambulator. For predators near that body of water, pursuing their prey could prove to be too much of a risk, so instead they might start waiting for their prey in the water, as they would eventually need to drink or cool down. Perhaps this predator could evolve from the already semi-aquatic Tentatestudo, a basal clade of Canalifers that preyed and fed on carrion of early terrestrial Pentacrabs. To become an ambush predator that preys on bigger prey, they will need to straighten their mouth parts for better strike and become less noticeable for a better ambush. In this group, that we will call Malotestudum, shells would develop several plates, somewhat resembling foliage of Soterathosa, which would also act as a method of thermoregulation, allowing them to radiate heat similarly to backlaps of blue ventabulators. In addition to that, their eyes could slightly move upwards, allowing them to see above the water, even when their body is mostly submerged. But of course, that lake would also be inhabited by other marine organisms, such as descendants of Notocolum and Pentacrabs. But for now, let's leave it for the next episode, in which we're going to come back to the waters of Methania and observe how ecosystems have changed since the last time we talked about them. As always, a huge thanks to all artists who submitted their artworks for this episode, making it look much better and saving me tons of time. If you're enjoying these videos, make sure to leave a like and follow to see more. And remember, never stop exploring.